I think you're right. It is a good place to transition into the last topic for the night, which is this heated academia debacle that cropped up this week. Actually, only a couple days ago, really. So a colleague, acquaintance of mine that I met through Sociologists for Women in Society, which is a wonderful, wonderful organization. I cannot stress that enough. Literally, probably the best conference I've ever been to, bar none. Um, just because it has none of the kind of like ridiculousness that all of the regional conferences have going on. Unbeaten lifelong on Pokimane. Good shit, PJ. Right. So
It's a great track to be unbeaten on.
Nicole wrote this article about the new Title IX rules, which if you work anywhere adjacent to higher education, you know that this is a fucking problem. It is nightmare fuel for those of us that have, kids that count on us and depend on us, that know that we're mandated reporters and that we have to kind of navigate that with our students now going forward, and how that changes these relationships. And the piece, um, is in Time, which it's a pretty reputable publication. But there was this faculty member, a male faculty member, who was tenured at the University of Utah, who basically took it upon themselves to do exactly the thing that both men in gaming do to women, and a lot of academics do to non heterosexual masculine academics and non white masculine academics. Which he took it upon himself to just make the most salacious comments you could possibly imagine, which are here for your unfortunate viewing. And I'm perfectly content to put this man's name on blast. He already got roasted by most of the academics that I follow, and then some, for being an absolute shitlord. But he came out and was talking about how Nicole's article and the colleagues that she wrote it with make one of the dumbest critiques yet of the new Title IX guidelines, in which they fret that university tribunals will have to suppress rape kit evidence, asking since when do college committees collect physical evidence. Now then, a graduate student from within his own department said, if you want to understand why the culture of gender discrimination and harassment is so bad at the University of Utah, look no further than this lovely bloke in the social department at the university who said these terrible things to Nicole, who was in that department. This dingleberry, and I'm going to go on record and say that because I can, quotes and retweets that student's statement and tries to be like, didn't you know that I made a speech at Women's Week, 8 years ago? Because someone really gives a fuck about that. And he's like, look at these great things I've done. I wrote a book about marriage. I gave a talk at a Women's Week. I am so good. And then the coup de grace drops this little nugget by saying, finally, to the student, here's some free ex cathedra advice. You should avoid publicly antagonizing the tenured faculty at your own institution or elsewhere. Let me tell you something. As someone, and Reese, if you're still here, you know that this just it burns deep inside of us and the shit that we've seen, shit that has been dealt with. For a tenured faculty member to come out here and publicly antagonize a student in their own department flagrantly by telling them that you should do better to not come for my neck is some of the most absurd, power manipulative, elitist bullshit I have ever seen. And it is my biggest gripe with academia because it is something that I have dealt with personally, that I've seen other people deal with, that there's this weird kind of liminal space that as a graduate student we have to occupy, where we got to walk on eggshells half the time because our funding is contingent on passing our classes, our publications and our passing of our milestones are contingent on our relationships with faculty and whether or not they'll be on our committees, whether or not they'll write letters of rec, whether or not they'll say nice things, ask us to co-author, put us up for fellowships, and all kinds of this bullshit. And so we got to be really careful about who we talk about, how we talk about them, And if we even make those statements, a former student from this department said that they had a similar situation with this faculty member, and they tried to handle it as politically as humanly possible because they didn't want to deal with the repercussions, right? But now, in the era of Twitter, where people just feel entitled, this faculty member, our president, and everybody in between, right, to say whatever they feel, this kind of nonsense comes out, and it's just like, well, so you want me to repress my opinions about these things, but you're allowed to put me on blast in front of the whole internet because you hold a position of protected career status.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Big for Lil writes, I wish I could say I'm surprised, but that's how professors be rolling. Tenure got them feeling like feeling invisible like a level 9 CPU boss.
I'm assuming he's at level 99, but yes, I like really, dude. It's
big
crazy, and so we were gonna connect this to the recent YouTube banning of Leafy, who for a long time had been making a lot of inflammatory content on YouTube, causing drama, chasing clout, basically like being the source for all things controversial in the internet sphere. And most recently, the target of his ire was Pokimane, who is a wonderful streamer, a woman on Twitch, and
who doesn't play any of the games listed.
Plays a lot of competitive games, in fact. And you know, he started a lot of drama about her boyfriend and you know her relationship status and her sexuality and all these other things about her, right, to cause problems. And YouTube finally took it upon itself to be like, you know what, pause, you're done, that's it, you are banned from this platform, which is a move that does not get made often, right? Twitch is the same way. Only recently did they roll out some serious high-level bans against people like Dr. Disrespect to remove them from the platform. Like, you cannot exist here because you violated the rules too much. I only wish that tenure would not protect faculty from maneuvers like what YouTube and Twitch have done, because that's my problem with it. So there's I guess two questions I want to pose, Reese, for our last discussion here. One, what is the danger in a platform like Twitch or YouTube being able to exert that power over a creator to silence them for being problematic, but only silencing some people, right? Because they silenced Leafy, but PewDiePie's still making content. Keemstar's still making content. There's a number of problematic individuals out there who are doing the same stuff in different capacities, right? So they're picking and choosing who to silence, right?
Yep.
And so what might be the problems with them having that level of power and exercising as they deem fit? And then what happens in the academic context when there is no power structure, or the power structure, I guess, doesn't work in the favor of those who are most subject to it? Right? Graduate students, staff, low level non full time adjuncts, assistant professors who are trying to get tenure, right? I've heard from other faculty in my department who've had some shitty relationships with people who are in control of their ability to get offered tenure, right? And so it's like, what happens when those protections aren't there for them, but they can have their careers kind of put in harsh light by the Twitterverse, right? And then actually, I guess third question, and I know this is a lot, but how then do we deal with this individual and others like him who cry wolf and say, "Oh, I'm being canceled. Help me, right? I said things and people won't let me speak my mind."
Yeah. Mothman, I think these are really good questions, and I don't know that we're ever going to finalize any of it, right? Because I think at the heart of this is like, what is tolerance? What is free speech? What are rights? Like, these are enormous questions. I mean, exceed just these simple, not simple cases, but these two instances that we're using as sort of like case studies. I want to say, I think first and foremost, I just don't get like and maybe I'll come to know this as I get socialized into like higher rungs of the academy. But there's like a hazing that obviously happens, right? Like to say that being a graduate student is not like a profoundly hazing process is fucking ridiculous. I mean, it's shitty. It's absolutely awful.
The largest.
And some of the first, right. And some of the black market epistemology of graduate school in those first few weeks after you go through like GA orientation is like avoid these professors. This person's going to try and touch you. This person's going to derail your career. These two people have beef. Don't have them both serve on this committee. And you're sitting there like, I'm
Oh, you
22.
mean
I
like
just like
me?
want to write a fucking book and shit. Like, what? And so, and there's shit that happens in the academy, things that get said to people's faces, things that get written, things that become policy that I think to myself, and don't get me wrong, I was not some hood star. I was a nerd around the way. But when shit got critical, like Most Def says, I was not gonna be no punk. And I'm sitting here like watching, um, and it was usually right faculty to students or faculty to junior faculty, and I'm sitting here like, you, this shit would never happen on 146th Street ever,
Mm-hmm.
because I would have, talk about unwritten rules, I would have a fucking bona fide right to fuck you up, to knock your teeth into the back of your fucking head for just speaking to me that way. And I just don't understand how people go through the fucking horrors of graduate school, make it through comps and all of the other like both explicit and implicit weeding out processes, and then go and fucking reproduce that shit for the next crop of people who come up on the other side. And Cassie's saying it's actually unreal. And Cassie and I are from the same department, and I'm not about to name names here, but I'm sure that, I mean, Cassie and I have stayed up into the wee hours of the morning crushing bottles of bourbon, just trying to like parse out how the fuck it is that this happens
Mm-hmm.
in this context, right? And it feels like so much of the professional like socialization of graduate school and into the academy is about how to swallow bullshit. Um, so I think that's a piece of this, and that's just like about the experience of graduate school as such, and the kinds of, and I think the internet operates the same way, right? Like, I'm I'm not one who wants to leverage like arguments based on people's appearances, but like the things that Leafy says about other individuals, he would never say to them in person.
Oh
Ever.
yeah,
He's
no one
small
would.
and scrawny, right? Like, and that's, but and I guess that's the beauty of the internet, right? Anybody can be a bully and a thug and a gangster behind a keyboard, and it's sweet on the internet. That's just how the internet, you know, operates. Um, and so I think there's a lot at stake here, Mothman. And I'll say for full disclosure, um, I've been keeping up with the what is it, Wolfinger, or
Yeah.
Hoffinger, um, Wolfinger, right?
Yep.
The Wolfinger case, but the Leafy stuff, I didn't even when Marcus hit me up, I was like, "Yo, did you hear about Leafy?" I was like, "I don't know who the fuck this fool is." And so I actually spent the morning and the afternoon kind of studying up and kind of trying to get the landscape of what was happening. I think fundamentally we need to recognize that freedom of speech is not absolute, right? And I mean that's why we have like libel laws and why we have slander laws, right? Like you can say whatever you want as long as it doesn't encroach upon me. And these aren't my politics per se, but there's something to be said about the notion that like your rights begin, or right, my rights end where your rights begin, right? That I don't have a right to encroach upon you. And so I have a right to free speech only insofar as my speech does not then impinge upon your ability to exercise other freedoms.
Let me
Um,
hold on, let me jump in real quick because I think
sure.
the notion of free speech, especially when we're talking about digital media, tweets, videos, the whole like space that is the internet and the way that we use it. One of the things that's been really interesting from just like my air exam reading and Zubov's book that I finished thankfully recently. Um, One point that gets hammered home and it's something when I talk about digital media, especially with my students, and has been said by many of the owners of the major platforms that we all use, is that freedom of speech was never something they were concerned with or interested in protecting. It is not part and parcel of the infrastructure of digital media. They do not care about our right to have freedom of speech. In fact, because of the way that most of these platforms are set up and the amount of data that we are giving away by using them, and that's not to say that I'm like a tinfoil hat, we need to be hiding all of our stuff and our faces and whatever. I exist in the digital world very much visibly. That is an accepted fact for me. Um, because of the way that they're set up, the things that you say in digital space, you have less rights to than the things that you say when everything is off. If you
Right.
could somehow turn off all of the things that record you, that are keeping tabs on you, if you could go to a blind spot in the world, that would be the most protected thing you say, right?
Yeah.
If it's said in earshot of a microphone, if it's said on the internet, published publicly, and let's be clear, Twitter and every tweet that you make is public. No, Twitter does not protect you from that data being harvested. No one has to ask your permission to use your tweets for shit. You are not protected from saying that. You had your right to
Right.
say it, but it now belongs to everyone else once it comes out of
Yeah.
your mouth. And that's where I think the problem starts, right? Because I think you're totally right to say that there is a specific point in which someone else stops and someone else starts.
Yep. And I think you bring up a point that's really that I think we ignore the enormity of, and it's that we I think we oftentimes think of YouTube as a public utility, right? I actually don't think I think Reddit is like very niche. I actually don't know a lot of Reddit users. Everyone uses YouTube, right? Reddit calls itself the front page of the internet. I think that YouTube is more akin to the front page of the internet, right? In a moment where people are cutting the cord and folks are letting go of cable, YouTube fills in this. It becomes this like hub of information and data and content sharing. Um, and so YouTube has become, at least in its like use, a kind of public utility, like water, like electricity, like gas. But YouTube's a private fucking corporation. It's a fucking company whose end goal is not the protection of civil liberties. It's profit.
Mm-hmm.
It's profit. And we have to Zubov's point, we have next to no digital rights, right? Which is precisely why, like, we're in a phase of capitalism where it's like user generated capital, right? It's hand over fist fucking money because YouTube gets to make a fucking enormous profit with no work. User generated content, user generated content, and it's I think insidious in some ways and genius in others. And so, I think that's those two things are I think are in tandem with each other, right? Like, not simply like the philosophy and metaphysics of free speech, but also what does it mean to utter something um, in the context of a corporate environment, right? It's a platform. And it's not a public utility. It's not serviced by the government. It's not something. And so what happens, right, of course, is that the decisions about what is fair and appropriate, what's considered harassing or bullying, those decisions are not democratically made either, right? We, the sort of like using public, we don't tell the board at fucking YouTube, oh, like these are the things that we've deemed socially acceptable. They tell us fuck off.
Mm-hmm.
We are beholden to YouTube, right? In the same way that you and I are beholden to Twitch, you and I are also beholden to YouTube as we export this stuff out there. And so, we assume something about the freedom that we have that in this context falls away, I think, very quickly. And
Hold on.
and when we
I want
when I
to
think about
address Aries' comment here that there is work in maintaining the platform. Yes, the way it's constructed, the way that it's operated, that there is work there. However, all of their product comes from the people who put it there. If there were no
yeah,
users
right.
on YouTube, they wouldn't have anything. They're not
Yeah.
producing their own stuff. They're not being a studio
Well,
that's creating.
they are
Well,
now.
they are now.
They are now.
But like the inception of it was that people had to be generating content for them. Otherwise, there was nothing to watch. And
Right.
still, the biggest
Right.
things that come onto that platform are people posting VODs, people posting vlogs, people creating shows, a whole host of things, right? That we are unfettered, pure human raw material. That is the nature of capitalism the way it exists now. That is the point of Zubov's book. That like
Yeah.
instead of harvesting us to create material, harvesting our labor to create material in the way that capitalism used to work, now we are harvesting ourselves for material. That's why you being yourself and turning yourself into a product to be an influencer, to be a content creator, to be a streamer, to be whatever, right, is like a legitimate business strategy, right? Yeah, no, I agree. It's not totally effortless for them. They're just doing the. I think they're just doing the maintenance part, and they're refining the strategy for how to pull people to
Yeah.
the platform, how to keep them there, keep them engaged,
Yeah.
and now they're making strategic decisions about how to curate the content so that it's not problematic. Right? They made a conscious decision to be like, this has crossed the line of what we want our user base to be
Yeah.
exposed to, and we're gonna make a decision about that.
But I think ultimately though the raw labor hours on both ends are like incomparable, right? The,
I
the
agree.
the people hours that go into YouTube maintaining itself as YouTube as a platform pale in comparison to the people hours that YouTube does not pay for, that YouTube then monetizes, that around the content that then gets posted up there. I mean, just this alone, right? Like exporting the VOD and clipping it and editing it. I mean, I was up last Monday till 3 in the morning. Best believe I'm telling y'all right now, this shit is not going up tonight. I'm going to sleep. I got a meeting tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Um, and so yeah, I mean, like, and there are all kinds of labor things that are there. Um, I also think that the case of both Leafy and his content, and for to sort of like clarify, Leafy is a dramatic content producer who made a target of Pokimane, and I think it was something like of his last 12 videos, only 3 didn't feature some form of harassment of her or didn't center her in some capacity, which is part of what precipitated YouTube's banning of him and the termination of his account. But there's this question of tolerance, right? Like what are the if there is in fact a limit to free speech, if my rights sort of give over to yours, well, what then? What's the latitude, right? What's the cushion there? And I think that the paradox of tolerance is that tolerance needs to be intolerant of intolerance, right? In order to exist, we need to say no. We don't make space for neo Nazis and Klansmen and gay bashers, because to let them in to create latitude for their content, would then be to create an inherently intolerant environment. It's a paradox out of which we can't sort of like swim out of. And so, I think for Leafy and his supporters to say that to take umbrage with the ban and say that it's an infringement on his free speech, or in what's his face, in Wolfinger's case, trying to say like I'm being canceled, it ignores the fact that like all speech acts happen in context. They don't happen in a vacuum. We don't actually have an absolute free market of ideas. They always exist in a social context. And in Leafy's case, right, YouTube's going to act swiftly because it's looking to protect its profit margins, right? Like YouTube is thinking to itself, continuing to harness this individual, to host this individual's content is going to be harmful to our platform. He's got to go. And Wolfinger wants to say whatever he wants publicly while chastising others for critiquing him publicly, and then wants to raise his arms as victim when folks say, "Hey, yo, this asshole over here, he's part of the fucking problem." Freedom is always conditional. It's always mediated. That's democracy, right? Like we don't have freedom in the absolute.
Well, and I
and
think
and
one of the
so
caveats of digital media is that it's particularly anti-democratic, and so like the idea that yes, the platforms are businesses with rules. Part of the problem with that is that the rules are very heavily uh, leaning in the direction of ambiguity, which is why like Twitch has had a hard time enforcing its rules. It's why like YouTube not being clear about who and why and where they ban, and when these bans or suspensions are issued, shadow bans and all these things, like oftentimes it's hard people to know exactly what line they crossed because of the way
right,
the rules are written, because
right,
they
right,
don't have the platforms do not have to answer to your plea to be like, what did I do wrong? I
yeah,
read the rules, I interpreted them as such, you didn't make clear where I overstepped. And they don't
mhm,
have to, because there is a
yeah,
specific level of kind of like oversight that they exercise where they just say it's up to me and my discretion to determine how I feel about your use of my tool and whether or not I'm going
yeah,
to allow you to use it in the same way.
right, right, and I think that gets into the substance of Leafy's content in particular, right? Like, it wasn't just simply that Leafy was targeting Pokimane to target her, right? He was taking particular issue, at least from what I was reading. I invite you to cut me off and fill in gaps that I'm not privy to, because all of this is coming off of work from this morning. But my sense is that he was taking issue, and for those of you who don't know who Pokimane is, Google her.
She rocks.
She is I've never seen her streams. I've seen her Instagram. That's the only sort of interaction that we've had. She is conventionally attractive, right? Conventionally attractive, a gorgeous woman, and my sense is that she has an enormous male following, and Leafy's claiming that basically these guys are simping for her, right? That her viewership is as high as it is, not because of her gameplay, but because she's conventionally attractive.
Let me interject for anyone who's not acclimated to the vernacular. A simp is someone idolizing mediocre pussy, just so that you know what it means.
Yeah, and so the real beef, the core, is that he claims that she was hiding a boyfriend, a paramour of some sort, from her audience because her audience created this idolized version of her, this idolized relationship, this frankly delusional relationship, where their subscription to her made her this cyber girlfriend for them, and that for her to hide the boyfriend was somehow disingenuous to her viewership, and that they might feel differently about her, might not consume her content had she been more forthright or more transparent or more divulgent of her personal, however you want to see it, around the boyfriend. And so I think that, and this is to your point, because this is patently anti-democratic, because the rules are not clear, we're subject to corporate oversight here. I think within the context of YouTube, and in general too, I think it invites the question of like, what is the line around critique, right? Because I think, are there interesting things to say about the claim that Pokimane is capitalizing on simping? Yeah, for sure. That's a preview of episode 3. But I don't think that that's what Pokimane, or I don't think that that's what Leafy was doing. I think that's what Leafy thinks he was doing. I think Leafy thinks he was offering some kind of intellectual, highbrow, if trolly take on Pokimane's business practices. And I think that the problem I see here is manifold. I cannot wrap my mind around how you subscribe to someone else's content, someone who you do not know, right? Like in chat right now, imagine kind of friends, right? People who know us intimately, either together or independently of each other, right? Like we're in a room full of, I imagine, know us. But I cannot imagine subscribing to Frost, to Az, to Nick Merckx, to the guys that we watch, and somehow thinking that subscription opens the window to some kind of like personal relationship, right? Like when I subscribe to something or follow somebody, right, particularly when they're a celebrity, I go into that knowing that I'm entering a transactional relationship, right? That my relationship to this person will not extend beyond my consumption of their content, and they're building a following based on my contribution to whatever it is they produce. And so much of Leafy's like critique, I think, hinges on the whole like fucking friend zone thing, right? The idea that women are these gumball machines, right? That if insert enough quarters of basic human decency, then they spread their legs, right? That they become sexually available to you, but the issue I think I take with Leafy is that he takes umbrage not at the delusion, but at the supposed betrayal, right? That Pokimane has somehow betrayed the fantasy that's clearly the conjuring of her simping viewers. And so in that regard, I think Leafy's dangerous, not because he exercises critique, or that he's like a fucking edgelord. I think Leafy's dangerous because he clearly plays on a particular kind of misogyny that when we like magnify this has like incredible atrocities targeting it. Right? Like this is fucking Elliot Rodger level shit here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like and to me there's like a genealogy there between the viewers who take umbrage that like, oh my god, she's no longer my cyber girlfriend because she lives a private life and fucking doesn't fawn over me
Yep.
and I can't buy my way into like her affection. And then Elliot Rodgers saying like, I'm genetically superior and I'm nice and you don't give me pussy, so I'm literally gonna fucking murder all of you.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is what makes fucking Leafy so dangerous. Do I think that YouTube is going that route? No, but I think then because the issue is misogyny and not necessarily localized to Leafy, I then ask myself like, is the ban enough? Because Leafy's not the only one,
Nope.
right? And you made that point
not by
earlier.
a long shot. Yeah, I mean he's one of many who's engaging in this practice, right? Like this is a long-standing issue. It wasn't just him. He's been doing it for a long time. A lot of people engage in the business of producing content that simply has to do with calling out female content creators on the assumption, and this is the work of my thesis, that they are using the tactics of professional digital sex workers to garner capital. Which, if you want to do that, you have every right. Whatever strategy works, ball out. There's no rule that says that you can't do that. However, it becomes a problem when people attempt to profit and make drama and jeopardize the safety of people when they make these insinuations that are rooted in a heavily misogynistic outlook that suggests that you are doing the men a disservice by not being accessible to them in every way, shape, and fantasized ideal that they have, right? Their $5 warrants, X, Y, and Z compensation, right? It's a crazy thing to think of, and I don't know if I can remember for sure. And Reese, if you're still here, maybe you know off the top of your head, was it Elliot Rodger whose manifesto was the one that got 4chan shut down?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Right. And so like that is another, like 4chan has never been down, never, until that time. They had never shut their doors until that day, and they were like, this is a fucking problem. And we have to actually make a conscious and moral decision about our user base and what they can say. And it seems that 9 times out of 10, and Twitch did this, two-ish and a half years ago when I was writing my thesis, when they finally changed their rules, because the harassment of women on these platforms is what inevitably leads to change. Because they're like, we have to at least make some sort of concession that this kind of content is problematic, right? And I think that, I don't know if you're complete with your comments on Leafy, right? But I think that this is where I find issue with academia, right? Because by and large, I look at academia in the same way I look at digital platforms. I think that they're just big content production factories. Like a department sucks ass if its faculty and its grad students aren't pumping out baller content, right? Like why do we think we look at U Wisconsin Madison as like the coup de grace of Soch, right? Because they're just constantly pulling the best students they can and pumping out great members of the field, right? So we're like, all right, like they got it, they've got the good stuff, right?
When have that shit tattooed on our fucking foreheads.
When Shroud and Ninja left and went to Mixer, like that was a big fucking deal. That was a huge power shift because they're like, these are the top viewership pulling individuals, and they just jumped ship. It would have been like if they transferred midway through their process and were like, I'm gonna finish my PhD at a different department. I already got all this hype, and I'm gonna dip out, right? But no one holds anybody accountable in academia in the same way. When these issues crop up, academia and all of its ivory tower bullshit clams up and it's just like, we'll handle it internally. But inevitably, as you and I both know, nothing ever really happens, right? Because it jeopardizes the content that's gonna get produced by that department. They don't have millions upon millions of people producing shit for them. They have a handful of hand-selected individuals who are their roster that they have to maintain. And it would be more problematic 9 times out of 10 for them to come out and hold somebody accountable, right? And Wolfinger did the same shit. He, in a tweet, was like, to the president of the university, like, please, by all means, look at how these people are coming for my neck, and basically saying, like, I know that you're not going to hold me responsible for what I said, because that's not how this particular business operates.
Right. Right. I want to acknowledge real quick, Mothman, that Big for Little writes, Elliot Rodger became a superhero and a martyr for thousands of lonely men. And the same shit's already happening for Leafy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So many of the videos, I had to really like dig to find videos that were, and I hate to use this word because it's so fraught, but like more objective takes on the Leafy getting banned controversy. There were so many people who rushed to mourn the loss of Leafy, that he was sort of like venerated as like the last outlaw in what for many had been this like lawless land, lawless in a good way, right? Of like, I can say whatever I want, I can publish whatever I want, because it's YouTube and it's my content. And there are people right now who are really decrying his loss. And Leafy, of course, in my sense, is in true Leafy fashion. From what little I know of him, said it's bullshit and is already. My sense is I couldn't find the channel, so I can't confirm it. Is like, this is fucking bullshit. Fuck you, YouTube. I don't think I'm going to be reinstated. And then I think either went to his backup channel or started a new channel, and then re-uploaded all of the fucking Pokimane shit. Now, and we called this cancel culture part 2, and I think that it obviously, like, Leafy gets canceled in a literal sense, right? Like, you're deplatformed. And Wolfinger has the tides of junior academics turning to him and being like, fuck you, you're part of the problem. But do you remember Yik Yak, Mothman?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yik Yak was a vile fucking den of horseshit. I'll never forget. There was maybe an A5A probate at SU, and on Yik Yak was like, look, the monkeys are howling again.
Eek.
Yeah. And at Dickinson Free, it was the same thing. Now, the difference, though, is that I think at SU, you've got like 15,000 undergrads. So there's like a lot, but it turns into noise, right? At Dickinson, where there are 2,300, there's less, and every post has more gravity to it. And at Dickinson, there was like a huge move to say, you know what? TikTok's fucking poisonous. It's toxic. We got to ban it, right? And it's a college, right? Like, I don't know, it'd be you for you if you had any restrictions on you. I didn't have any fucking restrictions on me. I can watch whatever the fuck I wanted.
Yep.
It's a university, right? And everybody's an adult. And so it was the first time I'd ever like been a part of this conversation of like, we have to ban this from being accessible through our Wi-Fi. And Crispin Sartwell, who's a faculty member in the philosophy department, and I would venture to say, and I think he would venture to say, that he's maybe one of the most recognizable scholars at Dickinson, a tiny, little school in Central PA. He said something to the effect, and I'm not quoting him, but he wrote to the Dickinsonian, the college newspaper, and said, you know what? Don't ban TikTok, or don't TikTok. Jesus Christ, Freudian slip. Don't ban Yik Yak. He said, don't ban Yik Yak. Don't ban it, because now we can point to Yik Yak and say we have a fucking problem. And so when Dickinson stands up and says, oh no, like, we're this like equitable institution, we don't really have a racist issue here, like that's a one-off, you can turn to Yik Yak and say, look at this beautiful catalog of racist bullshit that has been said by your students. And I think that there's something to be that if nothing else, the suggestion is provocative, because what he's saying is, don't ban them. I want to know who the assholes are. Don't ban them. It's going to help us understand the contours of this problem. And so, it makes me wonder, do I think that, I don't know Leafy, and I couldn't get to watch the videos even that he made about Pokimane to offer any kind of take on them. But it makes me wonder, are there other strategies that allow us to leverage critique at Leafy and allow the video to stand for us to then point towards, hey, these are some of the fucking problems in this space, while also challenging him in some ways, right? It makes me think about how Twitter is now flagging the president's flagrant lies, but basically says, like, we're going to let this stand, because this existing in public discourse is in itself important, even if the lie is degenerative. And I'm wondering, maybe we say the like we and here I'm just pontificating, right? I don't work for fucking, but we flag Leafy's shit and say this is fucking harassment. But there is some kind of intellectual merit in engaging with this. And obviously Leafy's not the fucking president. And Leafy's, it's not like the president lying about COVID, right? This like global phenomenon. Leafy's pointing the barrels at another individual, and that of course feels very different. But I think ultimately Leafy's ideas point towards a broader misogyny in these spaces that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I think that, and we definitely got to wrap it up here. I think that points to my issue with the thing that we're not going to get into at all, but I will mention is the Harper's Magazine, where the open letter where everyone was talking about justice and open debate and cancel culture, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
leaving it up, as you said, leaves the possibility of debate open, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, rather than people having to say like, all right, cancel or no cancel. This is the hard and fast line,
Yeah.
right? And it brings us back to that question that you posed last week, which is, like, then what then does justice look like? Well, justice can't look like shit if we can't have a debate about what actually went
Right.
down. If we can't
Right.
at least point a finger, hold somebody accountable, and then with that record of accountability that we have, start to then craft an image of what justice is going to look like going forward based on what we know, right? If we just take things at face value, remove them from the equation entirely, and say like justice has been served by removing that from the equation, right?
Right.
That feels pretty hollow,
Right.
and as like a
Yeah.
very stopgap response, because it only hampers one individual or one instance of the problem without addressing the actual inherent issue.
Mm-hmm. And what we get is polite misogynists, not the eradication of misogyny. And I think like one's a win, the eradication, and the other makes challenging the fucking issue harder. And in Wolfinger's case, you don't get to fucking pick a public fight and then say you're getting picked on.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get it's very different when you take a principled stance and it's unpopular, right? Okay, stand your ground, do your thing. You don't get to be a fucking prick to graduate students on such an enormous issue, and then when challenged publicly around an issue and a fight that you picked publicly, you don't get to fucking say that you're the victim. Um, you made a public utterance, and the public spoke back.
Yeah, it's like you said. If people were face to face, in an outside context, in a personal setting, those things would never be said, right? Because then, once they are, you buy a ticket to my favorite film of all time, Fantastic Hands, and Where to Catch Them. Like, that's it. Like
Yeah.
it becomes a wrap.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And I'm interested to see how his department responds.
Oh God,
Um,
I'm waiting for some sort of acknowledgement. It's already been
because
2 days, and I haven't seen shit yet.
I don't know how you're the chair or director of graduate studies and don't see the choices that Wolfinger make as poisonous and deleterious to your department, to the integrity of your department, to the health of your department. And I think more broadly, this case brings up so many issues about like the fucking juice and clout of tenured faculty
Oh
and
yeah.
how they weaponize it. Because right now I'm sitting here thinking like, I'm on the market soon. I have no intentions of moving to Utah, but maybe there's some swanky job at the department.
Mm.
Is somebody going to uncover this VOD and be like, race, interesting?
Don't worry, they don't have any money. They just paid $420,000 to a cyber criminal.
I heard about that.
Yeah, so
Ridiculous.
I don't think they're gonna be hiring anybody anytime soon.